Welcome everyone to the fourth of our art talks here at the Lesley MFA in Visual Arts January 2021 residency. I'm the director of the program, Ben Sloat. I want to remind everyone in our Zoom to keep their mics muted and video off during the talk and during the Q&A. If you have a question, please put it in the chat and I'll call on you. We start our public programs with a land acknowledgement. Lesley University here in Cambridge resides in the ancestral and unceded lands of the Massachusetts people, whose name was appropriated by this Commonwealth. We pay respect to the Massachusetts peoples and their neighbors, the Wampanoag and Nipmuc peoples, who have stewarded this land for generations, and we offer our appreciation to the lands and waters for sustaining us. Our general thematic for this residency is transformation and crisis, which considers various artistic methodologies and responses to times of uncertainty and upheaval. Our public programs began Sunday with a faculty panel led by MFA faculty Alex Jackson in conversation with Gerald Sheffield II and Jordan Seabrook. Continued Monday with the mixed media performance-based artist Rebecca Belmore, Tuesday with visiting faculty Nikita Gale, and yesterday with curator and scholar Ruth Erickson. Our art talk series concludes tomorrow with the sculptor Doris Salcedo. I hope those watching the live stream on the front page of our website can join us. The work of today's speaker, Eric and Mack, varies from sculpture and installation to wall pieces and works on paper. His aesthetic involves a particular type of tactility and usage of common items, primarily those related to clothing. His works flow and shift, alive with a spectrum of hues, irregular shapes, and poetic drama. References to the fashion industry and the figure impart a seductive quality, connecting to identity or a material fiction of desire and intention. Eric's work in Paula Cooper Gallery September exhibition was highlighted in Artforum's Best of 2020 feature in their December 2020 issue. Cheyenne Julian writes, Mack has described his art as having the, quote, intricacies of a palm, unquote. I love to think of the work in this way, as a storytelling topography to be examined with care. After months in quarantine, it was refreshing to encounter his fabric pieces at a recent group show at Paula Cooper. They activate poetic interplays among color, density, texture, pattern, opacity, line, and text. And rather than dwarf us with their magnitude, they made us aware of the relationships between the body, light, and architecture, inducing us to slow down. Solo shows of Eric's include those at the Power Station Dallas, Baltic Center for Contemporary Art in the UK, Scrap Metal Gallery in Toronto, and the Brooklyn Museum in New York. His group exhibitions include those at the 2019 Whitney Biennial, Serpentine Gallery London, Kunsthalle Basel in Switzerland, MoCA here in Massachusetts, Pulitzer Art Foundation in St. Louis, and MoMA PS1. Please join me in welcoming Eric and Mack. Thank you, Eric.
Yeah. Cool. Thank you guys. I'm really excited to, be in conversation and speak here. Yeah, I mean, it's been a while since I've done one of these, so I'm excited to, begin to share my work again. So let's see. I'm gonna share my screen. Okay. So first off, I just like to do I want this to be kind of informal in the sense of the way the images are they're going to kind of jump around in time a little bit, and eventually I'll settle on to speaking about a few specific shows that I feel are really relevant right now, not just for me, for my practice, but for just a general kind of public address and the opportunity to kind of visually represent things that I feel are kind of emotionally relevant. So originally I'm from Capitol Heights, Maryland, and it's a suburb of Washington, DC. And yeah, I pretty much grew up there, went to high school there, and some early influences, my parents, they actually met at the National Gallery of Art, and I feel like that museum has a really special connection to me, not just because of that, but just this huge index of uh, art objects that I've kind of grown like kind of an intimate connection with, like a lot of like the specifically like the modern wing and the like Abex works, like the giant Rothkos and the Koonings and all of those works, and artists. And so I kind of began there. And I went to arts high school, at Suitland High School in Maryland. And from then on, just kind of began to think about what it would be like to make art. I'm really thinking about a kind of point of expression that dealt with the way that I was feeling, political identities that I were trying to like better understand. And yeah, and so I gained a lot of my tools there, in doing like sculpture, photography, and painting, and not really having to make a explicit decision about what my selected medium was. I wanted to go to Cooper Union as a place that also like spoke to that kind of general fine arts practice. And I didn't end up getting into Cooper right away, but I ended up going to MoCA for a bit in Baltimore, and I enjoyed that a little, pretty much enjoyed that, and mainly focused on sculpture, but kind of discovered painting as well, and more of a academic sense. And from there, like kind of figuring out like what some of my issues were with painting that began to brew. And yeah, Cooper was a kind of amazing place for me to experiment and engage in a discourse of painting, and really like learn to like argue my positions and the things that I cared about and valued. So, and in general, like kind of establishing the kind of material identity that I was interested in with the work. And first and foremost, one of the main thematics that still kind of sits with the work has to do with a real care for materiality, and the objecthood of the painting object, and emphasizing the kind of dimensions that construct a painting, and why they were so, and if so, like could certain attributes be replaced, like could the cotton duck that you get from Utrecht be kind of replaced with a kind of silk, or stretched with your favorite T-shirt that you grew up with, or the stretcher bars being replaced with a flagpole, or a number of other kind of structural things. So those kinds of almost linguistic plays were really important for me to be able to express and consider. And that kind of goes into my time at Yale. And I graduated in 2012. And that was important but like really difficult space for the work because of the kind of traditional, largely figurative or like largely representational kind of ideas around painting that I think I came up against. You know, and it becomes like very nuanced, like a lot of those those critiques and discourses. But yeah, like, yeah, I feel like it's like kind of important to just kind of have a loose like timeline of where I've kind of arrived from. And but that is a bit of my education. I also did the Studio Museum in Harlem around 2000, that was 2014, 2015. I was a resident there. I was a participant at the Skowhegan that summer in 2014. And that was incredibly informative and, you know, yeah, have a lot of like a strong community because of that. But yeah, so that's that. And, you know, I'm definitely open to having like questions or whatever from, you know, about my past. But in starting, this work here was made in 2013. And it's called How You Became an Accomplice. And it's a work that literally like uses a bolt of jute fabric, and maybe you can't tell, but it extends into this mud cloth fabric, and then is sutured to a coffee bag, and the coffee bag. These are all seemingly like similar kinds of textiles, like with a kind of coarse weave, and the fact that they would be sutured together, they have to operate in a continuous form. The way the fabric is kind of sat on the wall, I felt like had to do like was related to a seamless form, which is like a kind of commercial backdrop that extends from the wall and continuously like goes to the floor, and it obscures the line, the seam between the floor and the wall, hence the word seamless. And I wanted the fabric to feel like a continuous gesture, with a start point and an end point, and in the middle that there would be this very physical painted moment. And in fact, what maybe we could do, yeah, okay. So you can see a little bit more of what's happening with the collage, and the painted lines are actually where the fabric is cut and then glued together with paint itself. And so I wanted the line to be able to speak on multiple levels, physically and pictorially. So, and really thinking about like also the utility of paint and like what's its actual function beyond like optics and kind of aesthetic manipulation. Like, can it actually be used as glue, and can it also at the same time contribute to the kind of depth of the picture and depth of an object, and add a condition to the surfaces and materials that are being used here. And there's like a general like kind of archive of like materials. There's like a Grace Jones album cover. There's a couple newspapers and like discount clothing store, like circulars and yeah, cut paper, collage and things like that. And I wanted them to all kind of like feel like they were in motion, but also contained by this plastic kind of tarp. This is completely transparent, so you can barely see it. But the fact is that it holds gesture and allows it like kind of suspend it in space a bit. But yeah, this work was shown a couple of times, and the last time it was shown was at the Kunsthalle Basel. I think it was 2017. So yeah, it's been nice to kind of get to know this work over time and kind of revisit it and look at it again and see new things. And so like for me, like also like in growing up, my dad actually, at the same time as working at the National Gallery, he also had a clothing store that like when I like at the age of like 8 or 9 would like join him in like helping him. So there's like some of the fashion relationships in the work operates on like a number of levels, but one being kind of personal, intimate, and a lot of the kind of comparison and relationship to the actual fabric of the work, like I think has to do with a kind of play on like knowing and like the kind of recognizable everyday and the kind of like kind of alienation and kind of I mean in some forms like kind of classist or class-based like separations that I think those things kind of exist within painting and some of the pictorial aspects as well, these kinds of separations from feeling. And so, yeah, so this work, yeah, so that's this work. Yeah, so you can see that red line, which sits on the other side, the opposite side as well, because it's truly a cut. Okay, we got that. And this work is actually was shown in Brooklyn at this gallery called Signal that like is no longer existent. But yeah, it uses like a number of things. There's a t-shirt on the opposite side, a Bob Marley t-shirt, and extending off here are like kind of designer scarves and handkerchiefs, and there's a piece of felt, and so the work actually is able to spin and rotate with this rope here, and the relationship with the fan ends up being like a contingent one, so that the fan is allows for a kind of contact and movement, and so once it's like, so I saw the fan as like a kind of anthropomorphic kind of a figure that the gaze of the figure, the gaze of the fan allows for the movement of the artwork, the art object. And again, like, you know, it's a bit of a mobile, but the kind of lightness and the ability for performance, I think kind of like extends kind of language collage or painting into something a little bit more, something more about life and a kind of variable existence. Yeah. So this work also has a few grommet holes, and originally those were just used as like a kind of utility, a point of hanging, and later on, like I wanted to use them more as like a kind of a complex like pierce into the surface of the material. And they're also like interesting framing devices. So I wanted them to like collapse into a representation of like bullet holes at a certain point. And there was a story that I was reading about Bob Marley and the fact that he like at a concert was shot, and there was something about that I felt like the work just inspired by the kind of the vulnerability of the body, and thinking about the t-shirt as like a surrogate, and also like thinking about the fan as a literalism, or like someone who was a fan of a celebrity or a musician, and the kind of contingency of the gaze and all of those things, and the performativity as well. So this I think was like either 2013 or 2014 this was made. So it's a little bit still in the same line of the timeline. So this work is a moving blanket work that the moving blanket ends up being like an important kind of material that I use in the moving blanket, like its quilted quality. The chevron kind of symbolizes a kind of movement of surface and opticality. And so this has clearly been painted with acrylics. Actually used pegboard to like impose these dots on this form that was already like the surface is already gridded in a way. And so I felt like these two things, like especially in relationship to the viscosity of the paint, like allowed for some ruptures to happen. And of course, it's been cut and kind of reorganized to allow for the surface to kind of pop out to the viewer and present itself off the wall. This work I think was shown in a group show at Suzanne Geis on Grand Street, and I think that was definitely 2014. But there was somebody who reviewed that show that referred to it as like a dejected drunk in the back of the room, and I thought that was really funny. It just giving, like acknowledging the kind of life and like kind of almost like contortion of a body that this work kind of possess. Piece just kind of billowed off the wall in a way, and it definitely was completely intentional. And this ends up being like almost like a decal to ground some of the material concerns and questions in the work, a lot like the first piece I showed you, and it's like the New York Times. Yeah, and so like I named it "Finding Comfort and Easy Distinction." That's what the piece is called, and there's like a real complicated fashion editorial image with this Black woman wearing like I think she's like wearing like a Balenciaga jacket, and And then there's like Kurt Cobain, and all of these things, like having like a million different kind of points of legibility. But I like the kind of alibi of it being like just a day and time that the newspaper was produced, and as well as like a season in which these garments are produced, and this photograph definitely has a date. And so these are things that like have to do with kinds of organic matter, points of decomposing, or growing old, um, or dated. And eventually this paper will become yellowed, more and more yellowed. And and so they have this kind of they're tied together and end up like renaming and reconstituting one another. Okay. And this work was also shown at Signal Gallery. And it also like fuses together a number of different surfaces. There's like kind of discarded pieces of the painting, and kind of cherished, a cherished Tweety bird scarf at the center that's transparent, and like these various like materials that extend basically from this soft rectangle that is a moving blanket as well. And I guess a lot of my interest with moving blankets had to do with kind of reconstituting value. Usually moving blankets are used to like protect protect valuables, and to cover art and cover furniture and moving. And so like it's like really like a transient material. And the fact that it's also like kind of that transience is doubled in the kind of movement of the chevron, here and here. And so I kind of, at this point also, like I believe I was working at McNally Jackson in New York City, and it's a bookstore that also has like a really great magazine section. So I was actually helping organize the magazines at the time. And so like as I would return some of the magazines, I would tear out some of the interesting editorials and keep them for myself. So I still have this like archive of images that like I keep until I feel like I can use them. And at the time, it was like kind of like an index of surfaces and garments that I kind of coveted and wanted to use, or felt like the image itself, it was an ideal way of observing the form of a garment, or the form of like the document of like this thigh-high boot or something. And so yeah, I would just collect them, and they end up being like attached to the surfaces of this canvas drop cloth. And then to create this kind of movement between these two surface planes, cutting it, braiding it up, and creating a continuous line out of like kind of disparate materials and colors and things like that. And yeah, so like there's a literal like kind of push and pull between the background and the foreground. And then of course it like kind of extends into the floor in this way that I feel like ends up showing up in like later works. So something to take note of. And then it's a point of attachment to the wall at the top, the knot as well. And this is a work called Partition, and it also, so this work ends up being kind of a record of like a kind of usage of this this pegboard material. I used to work in this very small space, and so there were just these. I collected like a stack of these pegboards that I would use as like as a kind of silkscreen, and it was kind of a way of organizing and creating like surface tension on a given fabric. So I would do that to kind of begin to start the work, and it would of course like create these like polka dots, and depending on the many layers, it would also take on this kind of memory of those gestures. So that's like kind of what you see here. And as I collected them, I kind of turned them into this this collapsible like folding wall. And this one is not so high. I believe it's like maybe 4 feet high. So not super tall, but there's other ones that are a lot larger. And so, yeah, so I mean, you can see kind of all of these kinds of entries that have accumulated. Yeah, and a lot of the important part for me with this work was that you would be able to experience both sides of the work, and like be seen in the round. And then they would be tied together, either like zip ties or like laced up like a pair of tennis shoes, or sutured together, and all of these varied ways. So and this is the other side of it. And this work was made in 2016, and it is called She Will Lean with Her Back Against the Wall. And it again is like a variety of material surfaces and fabrics, and there's points that are more explicitly dyed, like here, and the center point is actually like shapes created with a dye application, and yeah, this part of the work is a blanket that had been cut up and then put back together with just with gesso. I think you can see it better. Yeah, so the texture is super interesting, and I think a part of a thematic in the work has to do with a double meaning, and the kind of, so the meaning of a line or a cut is not just simply a point of deconstruction, but that there's something that also speaks to a gesture of being put back together again. So the reorganization, there's intention around it in order to find like a different kind of compositional identity for the work. And then there's this this fragmented scarf, and really thinking about the scarf as a kind of a standardized form, having to do with like a measurement of one's head or one's neck. These are points that have like a kind of openness in which anyone is supposed to be able to use a scarf and use it to speak through it. I find those things kind of interesting, and the same with this blanket here. I think I bought from like Walmart or something when I was at Skowhegan, and I thought that this had some funny shifts in pattern and things. So I felt like it was something easily that I can bring into my kind of language. And then this beautiful pink velour striped. And I think another aspect of this work that I find really important has to do with the relationship to the wall, and the fact that this work, the most important part has to do with like its own choreography, like the way it's able to hang off the wall and extend to the ceiling. It kind of, I think it comes out almost like at least like 10 inches like from the wall. So it comes out quite a bit. And then there's this small bit of curtain rod that kind of formally like connects it back to the wall. And this piece was shown for the first time, I think, in Paris at Almine Rex Gallery, and it was opposite of Soil Thornton, like both of our first shows in Paris. So it was a really exciting kind of occasion, and we're both abstractionists, so that there was like this kind of interesting standoff with one another's work. And this work is called A Lesson in Perspective. And this, I mean, I'm mentioning the spaces because they really affect the way you see this work. This was at the Baltic Contemporary, and in Gateshead in the UK. And this was during their Artist Awards, and I was chosen by Lorna Simpson to exhibit my work here. And so there were a number of works, and hopefully you get a chance. I think that there's like more documentation of that. But the space is beautiful and massive and so well kept. It was amazing to be able to make work in the space. So I conceived of a kind of plan before getting there, but I ended up kind of revising a lot of the composition of this work on site. So what I end up usually doing is having them buy a sewing machine for me, so I can kind of really respond to the space a little bit and reconfigure some of the relationship that the work has to the site. There's this woolen curtain from the 70s that like is sutured with this Coleman, almost like a collapsible gazebo tent. And there's this naturally this like cutout in this tent structure that I felt like almost was like a viewing, like it felt like almost like a frame to see the room in this really different way. And then the work extends a little bit further down past the pink velour. And I felt like the work, it was important for these lines to be present in the way it's suspended, and really thinking about perspectival space and the kind of drama, to create kind of like drama from like in considering flatness, creating dimension from flatness. And so like some of the orthogonal lines from like learning how to draw perspective, to allow those things to be like material, and actually like contributing to the tautness of the object itself, was really important, and that what is kind of simply where the title comes from. And this is the other side of the piece. So there's real kind of contortion. You can see the Coleman logo here, and this variety of like floral fabrics that have various like transparency, and so like the way it plays with light and really creates a dynamism in terms of the work's presence itself. So this is another view of it. And this is my sister wearing one of the shirts that I made. And actually the process of making the shirts is pretty similar to the first work, in which I roll out several yards of fabric and then just paint on it directly. And from there, I took it to the seamstress that sewed and cut all of the garments out from the cloth itself. And so it really is like a kind of a take on like a post studio kind of moment. But yeah, I've been really interested in like also how these garments go out in the world, and them as not just garments but paintings, that people would like live with them and eat with them, and almost forget that what they're wearing, and bring it into their lives, into their closets, or hang it on the wall. The kind of, I think there's something really important about the kind of accessibility involved with allowing for those references to come into the work. I can talk more about that. This is a detail from the first shot, so like that was the kind of connection that I was making. This is a view of like my old studio in Bushwick, and this is like a work that is made from two moving blankets, used as a painted surface. So I love this image because it kind of blurs the line between what's the studio floor and what's the work itself. So there's always something, some interesting like collection of surfaces and fabrics and textures and things. So I wanted to see how the work can accumulate this same kind of gestures. So around, it must have been, I think 2018, 2019, I believe, like I was able to work with Grace Wells Bonner for her line, her clothing line in London called Wales Bonner. And she and we met actually while we were both included in the show at the Camden Arts Center in London, curated by Duro Olowu, called Making and Unmaking. And we like met at the opening, and she actually recently won at that point the this LVMH prize. And she graduated from Central St. Martin's, and we kind of hit it off immediately, and in respect for one another's work, decided to later on like begin to collaborate on thinking about like the context for her clothes, and sharing references and books. And so Grace is very involved with the work of Afro-Caribbean writers and artists, and kind of imbibing the garments with real meaning and specificity and historical context, having to do with in the face of like colonial, having to do with like a post-colonial perspective. And I think, yeah, she's fantastic and has a real poetics. And so we like kind of naturally problem solved like this context for her fashion show. So this was the first thing, like this was at the start of the runway, and there's a number of other works that were installed like further down the runway, and the models kind of had to walk around them. And I liked the comparison and conversation between the garments and the works themselves, and what remains as art and what remains as fashion ends up becoming blurred. And then there's just thinking about the presence of these kind of draped works, and we collaborated several times after that. So there's a few more works that I've explicitly made for her set, or for an opening of her collection in New York at Toto Kayo. And they were all like great conversations for my work to kind of be involved with, especially giving a new kind of relationship with this language of textile. This is actually in the pit at Yale. And so this was like a very formative work. Like, I think this was 2012. And so there's this work here called Electric Blanket, and there's a grommet here where the fan fits. So it's over the wall socket, and the fan ends up allowing for the fabric to undulate. And actually the blanket is attached to the wall with button snaps. And then there's a few button snaps at the bottom, and the button snap actually like undulates and makes a sound, makes a literal snap to the wall. And actually thinking about like kind of a self-sustained like art object that not only performs on its own, but like kind of keeps its own measure and holds its own beat. You can also see, I think, no, you really can't. The surface ends up being, the pegboard is used, and also like a bike tire. But yeah, this is, I think, the first time I used a pegboard to like activate the surface. And then there's the wind painting. This actually was shown at the Wexner Center in a couple years ago. And there's this purple silk that had been bleached to the point of disintegration here. And this transparent yellow here. And then there's a napkin that I took from this restaurant in New Haven called Rudy's. And I felt like in order to in order for the work to truly have a kind of transient identity, that it wouldn't be fixed, or at least when it is fixed, that it would be fixed by my own authorship, that it'd be important that the materials themselves, even in fragment, be from various different places, and allow them to name themselves in a way, to ground and contextualize themselves. So there's always these kind of junctures within the work. This is this building on, it's now a Supreme store, but for a while it was a boutique called Totokayo that was there for like a brief moment. And this is another like context, a collaborative context with Grace Wells Bonner and her collection that exists here. And we talked a lot about like how the space was going to be engaged with, and then I would basically take this space, and we colored the windows blue, and the name of her collection was called Blue Duets. And so I felt like, oh, hello?
Sir.
Yep. How are we doing with time? Is that okay? Everything?
Oh, we're doing fine. No worries.
Okay, cool. Yeah. So this work exists again with like various kind of, there's a quilt that also fits with this fabric drop cloth, and there's more photos of this, but this is like the kind of official document of it. And then there's this like beautiful like transparent like blue, so it ends up being like a take on the same kind of gels that exist in the windows. They would also effectively be like undulating fabric, and that would actually cast, affect the space in a way that it would cast blue light, not just on the space, but perhaps even a viewer. So it like ends up being its own kind of object that you see through. So this is my sister again, and she's wearing what I call a outfit collage. And this work at one point explicitly existed as a wall piece. And it was important that the work also be worn and structured by a body. So it is not only structured by the wall, but also has this kind of performative dimension in which a participant or a viewer can try the work on and wear it, and give it structure. So the structure is actually the body, and the painting ends up being this ready-made garment construction. So the windbreaker is sewn to the pair of pants, and this is actually like a Reebok logo that extends upward, and I add a bunch of variable fabrics and painting surfaces, and there's like a moving blanket here with the dots, and there's a floral pattern, and there's some dyed fabric at the top, and there's some brown leather here, and then there's some like standard like cotton duck that extends on the side that ends up structuring the way she sits a little bit differently. And yeah, so this ends up just being like an interesting documentation of this work that also interacts with other works and previous exhibitions. I think that there's some documentation of that, so I'll hold my breath. So yeah, and this show, this is Dyelens, Dyelens, and this is my exhibition at the Scrap Metal in Toronto. And this like was a bit of a like almost like a residency, so I spent a little bit of time in Toronto and made some of the work here, and a few of the works were from collections in Toronto. And so yeah, there's the moving blanket work to the left, and then there's the large fabric collage that breaks up the space, and towards the back there's these hanging silk works. And so I think that there's a number of photos that we'll just get into. Another moving blanket piece, but organized quite differently, and also dyed and painted and then dyed. So like the gesso, the dye ends up absorbing into the gesso as a kind of porous material, and, like adding a number of like layers and dimension and creating depth. There's some text here. So it's fold. I don't know. Can't really see it right now, but it's another moving blanket work. And using newspapers collected in Harlem as surfaces, a painted surface to then incorporate. And this was a work that I made while I was in Toronto. With the like Pendleton blanket, and like felt very very local. And so this work, some of the larger gestures in it that kind of fit into the surface of the silk, like, so the whole piece was largely bleached. So that's kind of what you see here. Some of these gestures is the bleach kind of pulling away some of the color in the materials. And so while in Toronto, yeah, I just went to a number of like fabric shops, and kind of gathered things and met people and kind of engaged with like the garment district there. It's just super interesting. And this work collected from the scrap metal yard a bit, and then added a few garments that I found at like a local thrift store, and tried to create like a kind of dyed impression onto this canvas. And so it kind of feels like almost like the creation of like a photogram, but allowing for like the dye itself to absorb into not just like the like for instance this glove or like the piece of wood or like the shirt itself. Like, so I would just shift the compositions in a number of ways, and always allowing for there to be like a kind of a point in which the gesture began, and then a point of density in which there's like a lot like a densely put coverage of the use of the dye. And yeah, so this was like last year, actually no, 2019. You can see the dye going through the tag. And it's just like thinking about the dye or the paint like being this condition that changes the identity of the materials. They're no longer what they once were. They kind of are they're changed. And this is the beginning of the Brooklyn Museum exhibition that I had in 2019 called "Let Me Walk Across the Room," and this was on the first floor in the atrium of the Brooklyn Museum. And it starts off with this work called "Seat Pleasant," and it's this really this transparent piece of cotton fabric that kind of extends into the room and then crosses here. And so there's a kind of a constellation of works that like exist in this space. And basically I use the space almost as like a canvas itself. So there's all these kinds of gestures that are organized within the square, and allowing each one a kind of brevity and space to expand. And ended up painting this piece in the gallery with like dye on site and just on the floor here. It's an interesting experience. And I wanted there to be this kind of tension between the column here, almost as like just a point of tension. In this work, this work is structured by this this ladder and this pole, and I think, yeah, this work is called "The Opposite of the Pedestal is the Grave," and I actually made it when I was in Captiva, Florida, as a resident at the Rauschenberg. And we went on this trip to this the scrapyard, and the same scrapyard that Rauschenberg went to make his Glut series. And that was like a super amazing kind of place to kind of be where he was. But for me, like, there are so many kind of like connections between his inquiries and my own. It felt like if I were to find something like genuinely, it would have to like kind of come from my language. And so like I found this like crumpled fence that had this like open weave that I would like kind of connect that to the jute fabric, or and just like in thinking about the dealing with the grid, but dealing with a grid that had this tension, this constrictive tension, and I used that as a form to drape fabric over, to stretch fabric over, and to adorn, but also to add a kind of emphasis, repetition here with it's like a bed skirt here, like a gingham bed skirt that I found in Florida. And of course, like this costume cowboy hat. And just like in thinking about this construction as maybe eluding the figure, but that it could still kind of hold these references to the body, and to points of expression and memory. So yeah, I like thinking about this kind of surrogate for the pedestal, being this ladder that is kind of that is in use or in service to this art object. And I felt like it had all this like kind of potential energy for it to continue to be used, and so the pull through it doesn't really keep it from being used again, but it ends up bearing the weight of the piece in this way. I also just liked some of the work that was hanging from the ceiling, the fact that it potentially, the ladder could have been used to hang those works, at least narratively. And these are another the first run of shirts that I made that are dyed in these kind of variable ways. And there's like a pair of scissors. Yeah, this is the front view of that work. And actually, I'm really excited to say that this show is going to be traveling to Fort Lauderdale at the Nova State University. So it's supposed to be opening March 6th. So my fingers are crossed for that to actually happen. So we're going to kind of reconfigure this work in like conversation with that space. And so it should be really interesting to see what translates and what has to be completely reconstituted, and which I would like better. I don't know. That would be. This is this large collage, and it sits on this paper that's waxed, or it's not paper, it's actually waxed fabric. So it naturally has a kind of resist that I felt like was a good contrast to like the water, like the kind of water-based dye that I use. So it felt like, I'm thinking about like resistance in a kind of physical way, material way, and allowing for like some of the images, these like kind of time-specific images, to be either protected or kept safe for a time. Yeah, so this is the outfit collage that my sister was wearing. And so there's like some more elements that you can see here. There's a blanket and a piece of leather, a dried orange here, various kind of fragments extended into this like jacket, this windbreaker. And I love, like, I'm thinking about the kind of contortion of the natural kind of like relationship that it had to the body, like even without someone wearing it, that it was filled with like expression, and it's not it's pointing, it's very much about a kind of movement, even without the body itself, or in a literal way. So compositionally, it's like, I like thinking about, there's like a kind of a fleeting gesture, that even that it would sign in that way. Yeah, but it's a relationship to the wall. It kind of speaks to a kind of stillness, which I'm like kind of I'm learning from right now, I think. Yeah. This one's more recent work. I think maybe 2 years ago it was made. And it was shown in the show at Andrew Krebs. And so this is one of the participants from the show at the Baltic. She volunteered to wear the work, and also she was like the steward of the work. And so each day she would come to the gallery and remove the work from the wall and basically put it on, and then kind of rove the gallery, creating these kinds of visual relationships between the work itself and how she was wearing the work, and like all of this kind of care. Just really activating and giving life to the work a bit. So the outfit collage ends up being like almost a framing device for her performance. This performer, her name is Apple Yang, and she's based in Newcastle. So this was a work that I previously showed, but this is like a different kind of detail of it. This was the work that was shown at Totokayo. A few details. The pegboard here, pegboard painted here, and then like literally the palette knife that I used to apply the paint. And this is it in its full. So this is another, this is an example of the work like kind of reinstalled in a different context. And that there are like visual similarities, but ultimately sometimes with certain spaces, there's a point of compression or like expansion. So yeah, there's a connection to what it previously was, a real obvious connection to what it previously was. It ends up, the work ends up having following almost a prompt. So if it doesn't like fall in line with what the intentions of the physical intentions of the work, it's not effective. It's not the work. So. This is another work that was installed at the runway show for Grace Wells Bonner. And it's like a catamaran sail sewn to these woolen curtains. This is a silk work, and you can see here where the bleach, this gesture with the bleach that came from a previous work. Creates these cutouts. So. This is also in the runway show. Okay, and now we're here with this work that I made for Desert X. The piece is called Halter, and this work was shown in the Coachella Valley, basically off the road. If you were to make a right, you would hit the Salton Sea, which is this man-made lake in the Coachella Valley. And this piece was, again, included one of 18 pieces, I believe, in Desert X. And we found a location that would allow me to basically drape the building. And this abandoned gas station was kind of a perfect site. This kind of open planned structure that had this kind of iconic California kind of relationship. Early on, we were thinking about like Ed Ruscha and some of his like drawings of the gas stations and this kind of mid-century modern kind of aesthetic. But this was just like a kind of an interesting kind of structure to kind of be able to get to know a little bit. So I have a lot of photos of this. So the work is called Halter, and the name, of course, comes from like I'm thinking about a halter top, just the rope, the tie, like suspending the fabric, holding the fabric up and creating like levity and breath, and most of the materials were donated by the Masoni family. And so they were shipped to us from Milan, and they were so generous to send me a PDF of their archive. And so I selected what I felt like could activate not just the physical side of the building, but the landscape, of course. And I also wanted to emphasize that how important the fabric was for it to be like slightly translucent, and so it didn't create as much opacity as it, like if you were there to see it, you could kind of see more of how translucent the fabric actually is. I wanted it to like collaborate with the site and not erase it. And so I designed these kind of channels for the rope to structure tautly, like allowing for the fabric to like hold on to the building. And I mean, the design kind of comes from drawings that I made, you know, and some of the form I think is familiar from previous works. You can see like just the suspension of these points. It comes from like an experience with in using and suspending fabric and such. So I don't know. I mean, I think this work is pretty difficult for me to talk about, mostly because of the way that it ended or something. So the work ended up being destroyed in arson, basically. So someone, I was just called sometime in March. The work had been up for a month and it had another month to go. And the work was burned basically. And there was some like kind of fragments that were recovered, but generally, this piece was destroyed. So I passed the first week of its install. It had been vandalized in interesting ways. Like I thought people would cut from the fabric because this is like, you know, really expensive luxury fabric. The idea was that this was like almost like a public garment or something, a garment for the building in a way. And so I was anticipating people like take away from the fabric, or, you know, make a, I don't know, make a shirt, make a dress, whatever. I thought that would happen. That was very much within like conversations that I had with the curators, and I was willing to take that risk, but I had no idea that it would actually have been like pretty much 90% burned. Yeah, so I anticipate being able to like recreate this work, maybe in a different place, a different setting. But I mean, this was an incredible opportunity to work on this scale, and I'm, you know, still so honored to have been able to work with Masoni and engage with the community there. And yeah, so I don't know, I can answer whatever questions you have about that, but yeah, it like I've never experienced anything like that before. Um, and it's like vaguely mysterious. And anybody who knows like Masoni, they're like these, a lot of these patterns and colors and surfaces are like very signature. I was just so happy to like kind of have my hands on it. And I worked in this amazing, I've worked with these amazing seamstresses in LA, and we worked together in a small room with like domestic sewing machines and like sewed this in like 5 days. And yeah, it was just such a generative, like warm experience to make this work. So I learned so much, and I'm completely like in awe of this piece, and all of like the collective work that went into its existence. So. So yeah, you can see a bit of the transparency there. And just also like how strong actually the fabric was, even though it was soft, like it was incredibly pliable and stretchy. And I think there's something to be said about like what does luxury mean, in this context, like having like 400 yards of this fabric that probably like you know um, costs so much, a yard of it even, but it being exposed to the elements and allowing itself to perform, um, and breathe and things like that, like you really see strength in a different way. um, and this is drone footage. Yeah, and this work was shown at the Studio Museum in Harlem, and I believe the work was called Honey Hollow. This was like actually, this is a big leap back actually. So this is like 2012, my first museum exhibition, um, and this also like fits in thinking about the use of the moving blanket and the pegboard's relationship. Yeah, and so I'll finish up with this show. This is my Power Station show. Um, the show's title, uh, I'll go back slower. Um, it was called In Austerity. Um, in Austerity, stripped from its support and worn as a sarong. And I felt like there was a lot of there was a lot that I was thinking about and leading up to the show, and I realize now it was a lot of anxiety about the future, and wanting to kind of acknowledge some of the radicality that I believe exists in the work, um, and in the openness of the work and the kind of um, the fleeting identity of like aesthetics in the work. I think that there's the duality, there's power in the duality of these works being very much from this, like, embedded in the language of the everyday, ready-made materials, because they bring up memory. But I'm really like thinking about like kind of basic value structures and what like what how our bodies are contained and kept safe, and what we wear, what our choices are, what our selections are, how do we name ourselves. And this is literally an old power station. And so some of these works, if you saw the show at Paulo Cooper, you'll recognize like this work here, and this outfit collage in the previous image. And then here's some Missoni fabric. And these like transparent silks, and there's corduroy, and this is one of my favorite works. And just because of like the mix of textures and colors and transparencies. Okay. This is the top floor. This is view down. Okay. So I think these are my last images. So I would love to open it up for questions now. And thank you so much for hearing me out, y'all.
Hi, everyone. Can we all unmute and give Eric a hand for his amazing talk? Thank you.
Thank you.
We have a question from Laurel Sparks.
Cool.
Well, I misspelled question in the chat. Apologies. Hi, Eric. Thank you so much for that very generous talk. I really appreciate the sensitivity that you have to the identity of all of your materials. And my question has to do with how you frame or negotiate the relationship between the sort of raw bolts of fabric and the materials that have history, and how, yeah, like how you frame that and how you sort of negotiate the relationships between them.
Yeah, I mean, I think mostly I've realized, like, I mean, a while ago, I've realized that I'm a real formalist. So there's kind of points of organization that and classifications that I think the fabrics fall into that already exist in the language, and they end up, you know, there's this kind of epiphany moment that feeling like that they could be integrated in the language, or that they already are in a way. Like, and thinking about the use, like insistence on using the pegboard, even that, you know, and not just like a relationship to the polka dot, but maybe something more material based, like a kind of embellishment that rises from the surface, that, you know, sits on top of the surface, like an embroidery or something. There's a number of I think affirmations that I find out in the world that end up either bringing me back to the studio, or I collect and take back, and, you know, the kind of questions happen there in a more specified way. But I love to go to Mood and check out all of the bolts of fabric that they have there. But, you know, usually, yeah, there are like almost painting principles that I like kind of gather and call upon in those spaces, which kind of makes me feel like an outsider, you know, and like, you know, alongside like some fashion students at FIT, I'm like kind of I'm not making a collection, I'm making a specific object that I want to kind of create a new history with, and consider trace and transparency and saturation of color, and you know, how those things play, and knowing that those things primarily exist in the world first, you know, and they're not just about you know, a blocked off kind of painting history, exclusive kind of painting history. So hopefully in a roundabout way, I kind of got, you know, what you're talking about. Yeah. Thank you.
Hi, Eric. I have a few questions. I guess first thing is, can folks mute themselves unless you're asking a question, because we're hearing a little bit of sound coming through. Oh, actually, Amy Donis has a question. Let me throw it over to the dean. Amy, please ask your question.
Well, you could ask your question first.
I have like 3 questions, so I don't want to be too much. So please ask your question.
Well, I might piggyback on the last question. I'm really interested. First of all, thank you, Eric. Really amazing work, and love the cross section of the work as it relates to gallery installation, exterior installation, and so yeah, I'm really intrigued by your work. But in terms of materiality, I do want to hear you talk a little bit about the performative aspects of materials in their first order. So, sorry, I have a dog here who's obnoxious. Like with the Missoni fabric, if any of us are fashion geeks like me, we know that that fabric inherently has been designed to kind of envelop the body and accentuate curves and the kind of human condition. And the other materials that you use all have a kind of functionality inherently in their first order. So I wonder how you don't have to reconcile it, but I wonder about your thoughts regarding that. And then I have a follow-up question, which is about orientation and sight. I'd love to know how you think about materiality as it relates to when you do something vertical that might potentially look like a wall or a threshold versus something that is potentially a shelter. You know, if you look at a lot of the materials that you looked at, and how does that change in your process as it relates to a gallery installation versus what we just saw outside where it was absolutely engaged in the natural elements through kind of wind and sun. And so 2 questions.
Yeah. Okay. I'm really, I mean, I'm in my studio right now. You can probably see. But the work, I think, always kind of starts in this kind of intimate space, and is able to kind of project outward into the world, either in a gallery space. I find sometimes, well, often the gallery space is not kind of like not really the ideal space for the work to be seen. I feel like there's certain kind of impersonal aspects, or non-specific or generalized like aspects of architecture that you can kind of anticipate, that I think that the work kind of already answers in itself, in the means of its own like kind of its own containment. Like this work here, it's on the screen, is it's like it's an umbrella. It's a form of an umbrella that's extended into almost like a shelter, as a point of containment. But I like to think about the umbrella as like almost like a personal architecture or something, something that can be held, something that's like maybe for 2 people at the most, but this sense of containment, of the kind of concerns of abstraction. I think, yeah, yeah, that's been the kind of like a train of thought for me. So yeah, I mean, I don't know. I think actually the outdoor work was the first opportunity for me to actually really create my own sense of what architecture, the kind of architecture I'm interested in, imposing in a way where yeah, I mean, yeah, I do think that there's like things about the galleries that are just, often there's no windows, there's, hopefully there's some natural light, that there's those are spaces in which you really ask a lot of for the work to do. There's a lot for the work to do, a lot of work for the work to do, and reminding the viewer about the world out there, and what time is like, and what, and I think that's the relationship between what the fabrics are supposed to mean, yeah, and what they're supposed to express. And I like for the work to have a kind of autonomous identity, in which the work is able to keep its own beat. It's able to create its own shadow. It's able to like count on its own like kind of poetics, to speak talk about its own condition even, but like in order to avoid the kind of like insular nature that like it has to use like the challenges to be able to use things that we all have a relationship to, and that's a lot of why I continue to call the work like kind of that it's painting, that it like it's politically painting in a sense. But Masoni is kind of an extension of that, in which yeah, definitely for the fashion geeks. It, you know, there's such a heritage there. It's a heritage brand based in Milan. It's like one of the only like fashion brands currently that like is still run by mostly family.
Mhm.
And but like the thing that really tied me to the the, the selection of Missoni had to do with the woven identity of the fabric, and like you can see it with a loop and see how intricate and how like elegant and complex the woven fabric actually is, and the fact that it's not opaque. Um, you know, it makes so much sense that it would fall on the body in such a way. Um, but in the case of the way that I used it, it fell on a metal canopy. You know, it was used in this way that like was able to like kind of invoke the body, but it was something else. Um, so yeah, that's, I don't know, that I hope yeah.
No, it's great. I'm gonna put in the chat my latest person that I'm obsessed with. So you should grab it.
Okay, cool.
Yeah. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Really appreciate your work.
Really, thank you.
Hi, Eric. I have, you know, I feel like I've been thinking a lot about your work since I saw it at the Whitney, and I got a chance to see it in that space in East Broadway, and then again at Paula Cooper. But I guess what strikes me about the Whitney piece was it's so, you know, the work is so disarmingly tender in some ways, and so intimate. But that then it goes into these kind of places almost of violence and rupture, where like things rip, or you get a sense that, you know, these things are hanging by a thread, literally, like you feel like they're going to break any moment, and this kind of activation of a tension, and you want to help it, and you're like looking at it, but then it sort of transforms again into the wall piece and becomes something else. So I was curious about, you know, that kind of, I don't know if you want to call it choreography, but there seems to be there's so much care and touch in the work, even though at first it looks, you know, like it has a lot of movement and it was improvised, but then you see how carefully, you know, things are sort of opening up, and I'm curious about all those sort of interesting opposites that the work holds at the same time, um, and maybe how much of that is done in the studio versus in the space. And yeah, that's one question. I have another question,
Yeah.
but I'm curious about it. Almost has a narrative quality, and I find myself following this thread, for lack of a better term.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, yeah, I don't know. I like thinking about the work having its own choreography. I've said, and like I think it's hard because so many of these spaces, like gallery spaces and museums, like there's such a limitation to like how vulnerable the objects, the art objects, could actually be. So often it ends up being like um, things actually need to be really strong, and you know, and like and not change so much, or not change like while it's on view or whatever. But there is like a threshold that I've been interested in for a long time. and this kind of fragility as subject has been like something I think is really important and like inherently human. So like in thinking about the use of the bleach to like create these like holes in the fabric, like those holes are like kind of gestural in a way, but they're also like really kind of given over to the acidic quality of the bleach, you know, and the kind of tension of the way that the fabric has been knotted. They're like not explicitly of my hand. It's like allowing for the fabric to come in contact with something that either the fabric will be able to resist or it would just dematerialize. And that kind of tension, I feel like, it feels very real to me. And I think has to do with like whatever kind of semblance of beauty that I've like put together in my mind. Just like for the object to be able to endure to a degree. I think the tenderness is also like, you know, about I'm interested in like this pivot and the dynamism of like these contrasts. So yeah, like the violence or like the aggression or the direct like application of a gesture, for those things to be able to be tangibly felt. Often you end up needing a kind of contrasting element to really be able to perceive those, that shift or that difference, or like, you know, like I'm thinking about almost like in color, where in order for something to be really perceived as hot, like there needs to be like a kind of a cool, kind of a cold, colored and contrast, you know, just to be able to perceive it properly. And those are like kind of, I guess, formal elements. But yeah, you have another question, right?
Yeah, thank you for that. That's a lot to think about. I like it. Is, you know, often I encounter items that are sort of like forced together. You know, I really love, and we're talking about the Lower East Side. And growing up, I think my experience is, you know, a building that's 100 years old next to something that's like shiny and stainless steel and brand new next to something that's like crumbling. And it's all these sort of like forced moments of these different histories and materials and cultures and planes are just sort of forced to be neighbors in a lot of ways. And that's one thing I always find exciting and surprising in the work is how these sort of intersections, these interventions, these kind of forced patterning, which, you know, in a larger political sense is sort of like the fabric of our country. It's like this kind of forcing together of things that don't quite align, and here they are. But yet a new thing is made out of that. And so I was hoping you could talk a little bit about that.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I guess I'm like thinking about a way of like, I mean, these unlike things, they end up being sutured together, to create a new whole, a different like the entirety of the objects end up being different simply because, you know, a fragment is being taken away and replaced with something else. The weight of the piece could be completely affected by that intervention. Yeah, but I mean, I find like it's simply like the ways in which, I guess, I mean, I probably said this already, but like the ways these things are like end up coming together, like the lines of separation are also like the possibly opportunities for different points of connectivity, or even yeah, I mean, you know, in relationship to the political climate, you know, I mean, that's going to take some time to really be able to put together, I think, and like kind of create a super vivid, like tangential line for myself. But I certainly like want the work to feel like very much connected to the moment, you know.
Well, why don't we do two more questions? We have one from Martha and we have one from Shelley.
Cool.
Hi, thank you for sharing your work with us. And I just noticed, and I think Craig did also, that you were using the word suture often, and I wondered if you were using it purposefully or interchangeably with sewn.
Yeah, I mean, I like it better because it feels like less of a, I think sewn can be like really like kind of a loaded word, you know, and relates more times than not to like a specific craft, or, you know, you hear sewn, you hear of it, you think of a task, or maybe a domestic task, or all of these kind of loaded points like show up.
Because suture is sort of a medical term. And
Exactly.
yeah, okay, thank you.
Yeah, I mean, that's just, I feel like it's more like, I want more of a conversation maybe about Frankenstein or something like that. You know, I'd rather that to allow for like the kind of literalism around like this overtly like sewn kind of gesture. So yeah. So yeah, the clinical I think works better for me in terms of like being able to like open up the gestural language, you know. So.
Hi, Eric. Thank you again for coming and speaking with us. I was wondering if you could talk about some artists that might have impacted you. When I'm looking at your work, I recently saw Rodney McMillan's work and like Succulent, when that thread is like such, I'm a nurse, so I was like really drawn to how the thread looked. It was very much like sutured skin. Mm-hmm. So I was just wondering, like, other artists that you might be able to share that impacted your work.
Totally. Yeah, I think I love Rodney's work. I really respect it a lot. And he has such a long like trajectory of like abstraction and kind of integrating this really dense history of painting. He's awesome. I love, like, he has a recent show that he did in the city with I think like secondhand or things that he bought from thrift stores, like knitted pieces that he integrates with paint and all kinds of things. So I think he's really interesting. I grew up going to the museum and seeing David Hammond's, this one David Hammond's piece at the Hirshhorn as a teenager, and I was completely mesmerized by it. I felt like it just had there was that call and response between like the material and the kind of conceptual identity of the work as a whole. Like yeah, he's a giant for me and a lot of other people. But yeah, I mean, he's somebody who I like learned from, and I continue to learn from like early on. Sam Gilliam also is somebody who is super important, and his relationship to architecture. A lot of the work that he made in the 70s that were like outdoor works. He did this installation on the facade of the Philadelphia Museum that really resonates with me. I think the works are called Seahorses. Yeah, and they just have a kind of incredible presence in documentation, because I did not see that in person. But yeah, he's awesome. Like I'm just thinking about early shows that I saw when I was in school that really I can't forget about. Like there was a Sam Gilliam show at the Corcoran that really was amazing, and I think that was like 2004. And a little bit after that, there was a Morris Lewis show at the Hirshhorn, and that kind of got my gears turning, because I just had a problem with a lot of the preparation involved with painting. Like I felt like there were things that happened in the kind of tradition of like stretching a canvas that like cut out like certain haptic like qualities, just like really trying to get to a point where there was a connection between the paint and the surface, like let's just get there. And somehow the stained canvas, the staining made so much sense to me, and felt like it was very emotional and also and emotive, but also quite mysterious, like how it was applied. And for a long time I was trying to figure out like all these pouring techniques to get that kind of quality. But yeah, so those guys are great. And more recently, I've been getting into the Gee's Bend quilters of Alabama, and a lot of like those quilts as being really beautiful, perfect abstractions for me. Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Well, thank you, Eric. Can we all unmute and give him another round of applause? Because that was really fantastic and generous. We appreciate that. Thank you, Eric.
Thank you.
Cool. Thank you, guys. Really happy to be with you. And,
Thank you.
cool.
All right. Well, have a good one, everyone, and we'll see you tomorrow. Okay.